Boy, it's been a while since I've done one of these, isn't it? Anyways, let's get to it.
Sponsored by Bisswasser. Beer that is guaranteed to make you shit the bed.
What's up, everybody? It is I, the 98 Spider-Man, here with my first proper rant in God knows how long. And my topic today is of a political topic that royally fucking grinds my gears here, okay? And it is the European Union. Oh boy, this one's gonna get a lot of heat. I hate the European Union. I hate anyone who supports it. Anyone who supports this shit needs to have their heads fucking cut open with a spade and a new brain shoved in it, okay? Britain and the other EU member states have fuck all reason to remain in the EU. The way I see it, the EU is for power-hungry Euro pigs and lazy, reckless governments who just want to overspend the country's GDP. Labour. The European Union is a completely unnecessary organisation. Anything that the pro-Euro cunts say we can't accomplish outside the EU, we can. Okay? We can. But I'm not just going to simply sit here and bash the EU without valid reasons. So here are my main reasons why we should leave. Number one, reintroduce powers back to Westminster. Although the EU has a parliament, a single state's objection to a new piece of legislation would make no difference if the other 26 states were in favour of it. Nation states no longer get to veto when deciding on a new legislation. New legislation is put through either by consensus among the members or by qualified majority voting. Thus, the countries cannot block legislation they strongly disagree with. Essentially, the EU is too great a body to legislate, and the power should be handed back to Westminster.
The European Union does not regularly legislate on minor issues that would adversely affect individual nations, but rather issues of common trade or foreign policy. To this end, although it is indeed true that individual member states do not have as great a say and are potentially unable to veto legislation, this should not be a problem. Also, the idea that the EU is too large a body to have a common parliament is untenable when you consider that other large geographical territories with different cultural zones such as Canada, India and Russia have a single federal parliament.
Okay. Several fucking things wrong with what you just said just then. Number one, you just said that it's true that member states can't veto legislation, that it shouldn't be a problem. Well, yes, it is a fucking problem because it means that means that the fucking, what's the name? That the fucking Euro pigs over in Brussels can pass unjust, unfair laws that fucking our nations don't agree with. And there's nothing we can do to stop it. So yeah, that is a fucking problem. Secondly, don't compare the federal territories of the world to the EU. Russia, Canada, India rule over provinces and polity states, not sovereign states like the EU does. Thirdly, you've just given us some reason why we need to leave. The EU shouldn't tell us what to fucking do when it comes to our fucking foreign policy and common trade. They've got no right. That's Westminster's job, not Brussels. But we'll get to the topic of trade in a minute. Number two, the EU is a drain on the British economy. A huge amount of money is given to the EU, allocated to the bureaucracy and wasteful spending such as the Common Agricultural Policy. In 2006, a whopping 45% of EU spending went towards the CAP. To put this into perspective, that's almost half the EU spending allocated towards an industry and employs only 5% of EU citizens and generates only 1.6% of the GDP. This is truly unnecessary and is unequally distributed. France reportedly benefiting immensely, while countries with very little agricultural sectors seeing few benefits and yet expected to foot the bill for this wasteful policy.
More than 80% of the European Union's budget is spent by the member states. In effect, the European Union acts like a central government does, redistributing from the richer areas to the poorer areas within the European Union. We don't have a problem with rich London bankers paying a bit more to help the Welsh Valley, so why is helping poorer areas within EU member states any different? Although the European Union does cost Britain money, it is simply because it is a richer country. The amounts of money that are put in by member states is proportional to their wealth.
Again, several fucking things wrong with that. One, giving money to the Welsh valleys is very different to giving money to the poorer areas of Europe. The main reason being is that we know the Welsh. They've been under our rule for fucking eons, centuries. We know them, they know us. We know each other's culture, customs. We have things in common with them. As for the poor areas of Europe, we have nothing in common with them. We barely have any history with them. We know nothing about their history, culture, or customs, or heritage. So yeah, it's fucking very different when we give our money to them. Two, the financial woes of these unspecified, possibly former Ottoman, former Soviet countries is really of no concern to me. And before you say the predictable, oh, what is it with you in the pause? If my country was in the pause, I want it to be strong and stand on its own 2 feet and not rely on the forcibly taken charity of of some other fucking shithole country somewhere the fuck. Okay, thank you very much. Thirdly, the distribution thing clearly isn't fucking working. If it was, they wouldn't be leaving their shithole wastelands in search of work here, now would they? Number 3. The EU is undemocratic and unaccountable. The European Union is run by unelected, unaccountable elites whose power is vast. They often bring in legislation that has not been voted in our national parliament, yet supersedes our own laws that do not pass through such a democratic process. The common denominator between national and multi-level governing procedures is that each is tasked with coordinating opinion and ultimately policy and resources into the common pool. Power and influence within the European Union structures are divided, although somewhat disparately, between the European Parliament, the Council of Ministers, and the Commission. These bodies are designed to check and balance one another. In member states, citizens have the opportunity to influence national policy, making their elected officials in the EU's multi-tiered system. The closest a citizen comes to impacting a policy decision is through their elected representative to the European Parliament.
The European Union is continually strengthening its structure to be democratic and accountable. MEPs are elected regionally within member states, which is very much a democratic process. Further to this, MEPs vote in new legislation and represent their constituency and national party in their voting patterns. Deciding on important legislation through a qualified voting system also helps to illustrate the highly democratic nature of the European Council. Although there is a perceived gradual democratic deficit within the EU structures are continually being reformed in order to better reflect the wishes of their stakeholders, the EU citizens themselves.
And to that I say you've completely misunderstood what we meant by that. It's true, regional MEPs are democratically elected, but the presidency of the EU isn't. This is what we're getting at here. You know, the presidency, the people who unrightfully make all the important decisions about the EU, those guys don't get elected, okay? Number 4. We need to cooperate against global crime and terror. The main advantage of Europol is that it enables criminals that cross borders to be tracked and arrested easily by a multinational force. However, if it is considered that Britain is an island, the likelihood of criminals crossing our borders is quite low, thus rendering the major advantage of Europol somewhat irrelevant. If the aims of the UK are to fight global terror, then surely it would be of greater benefit to strengthen relations with the US, where there is a far stronger focus on tackling the issue.
We need to cooperate to fight the increasingly global threat of crime and violence. Europol is an effective multinational police and security force, and leaving Europe would deprive us of its benefits.
Right. So what you're saying is that in order for us to fight crime and terrorism, we need a bunch of unelected Europigs telling us what to do? No, we don't. I'm pretty sure we could still collaborate with other nations and still help combat terrorism the same fucking way. Like, I'm pretty. Oh god, this is so stupid. Look, we don't need to fucking have our powers stripped from us. We don't need to be fucking bossed around by fucking bunch of Europigs in Brussels to fucking, in order for us to fucking combat fucking crime and terror. Okay, we don't. Idiot. Number 5. The representatives that we elect should not be able to give away the UK. Britain must remain its own country. Being part of the EU threatens the national identity and the UK economy, amongst other things. Britain does not need to rely on its European neighbours in order to succeed.
Britain joined the European Economic Community in 1973, after learning that trade with the Commonwealth was not as lucrative as originally thought. The application was made in 1961 by the Conservative Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. The main reason for Britain joining the EU was for the economic benefits, so obviously it shows that in the age of globalization and increased competitiveness, Britain cannot act alone.
Not as lucrative as you say. Well, clearly the government back in 1973 was doing something wrong then, weren't they? The Commonwealth should be given another chance. Number 6. Immigration. Since joining the EU, especially in the more recent years, the amount of immigrants from the EU is somewhere around 200,000, with roughly a third of these people coming over for work-related reasons. Not only that, but also in terms of asylum seekers or nationals who are being funneled here by other EU states who do not want to deal with these people themselves. Additional to this, in recent years, legislation was passed that the UK hospital system would be fully open for other EU members. This is a system which costs the UK billions per year, with a fair portion of this money being spent on foreigners who have paid little to no money to make use of the facilities. This has resulted not only in an increased cost to us, having to pay for additional doctors and nurses which we simply do not have, but has also caused increased waiting times for the British citizens who have paid to keep this service running. Not only this, but the amount of immigration has resulted in the loss of national identity, with traditional British values being relegated to second place, while we instead focus on catering to the needs of foreign groups and their own religious beliefs.
What are these British values you speak of? Is tolerance not a British value? The issue of immigration is one perhaps too British, as to the point where almost the first port of call to make when there are ills of the society is that it's the blinking foreigners. You see, Britain has a secret weapon. It's called the Tier 4 visa. Every year we see British-born students competing at the level of second and third world countries. So why is it that Britain can still retain its Royal Society, its lead in science, economy, and industry, while its next generation are being dumbed up by watching Big Brother or these soap operas? Why hasn't the British economy or industry collapsed? That's because of immigrants who come to this country to study, because it leaves so much that their own countries haven't got the capability of teaching them. British education system is drawing more and more students to its country and in turn making them the business leaders of tomorrow, contributing to taxes, because their own countries haven't even got that industry and has to play with the rules of the UK. Entire industries have been made in the shoulders of immigrants, from the low end of income to the high end of income. The British always say the foreigners are stealing our jobs, but never asks why they can. Cutthroat work wages. Or is it that the foreigners don't have the British 9-to-5 attitude, where they start work at 10 and finish at 4:30, so that they can get home at 5? Now you say immigrants are costing the British billions. But may I remind you that on average, the working immigrant pays more tax per head than the British. Yes, there are immigrants who are doing benefit fraud, but how about the British people who live on benefits simply because they can't be bothered? They go on to bring up children with the same attitude and so forth. So, when you say foreigners are benefit stealing, list the law-abiding ones are paying more tax, and when Britain hasn't sorted its own people's problems yet, one begs the question, which does more harm? Capping immigrants so that no more professionals or potential professionals come to this country that basically builds it? Or accurately reforming your own laws so that benefit stealers don't get to do what they do?
Alright, stop right there, dipshit. I see what you're doing there. You're trying to make the British public look like a bunch of racist, lazy, good-for-nothing benefit scroungers. That is a fucking gross overgeneralization. True, tolerance is a British value, but there's a fine line between tolerance and being a fucking doormat here, okay? And it sounds to me like you're fucking confusing tolerance with unquestionable acceptance. We cannot tolerate people who are going to fucking be an economic burden or are going to raise the crime rates in this country. We can't. We simply can't. That's something we cannot tolerate. Number 7. Free trade is still likely. There are many ways in which the UK could maintain its free trade with Europe. Switzerland and Norway have free trade with the EU but are not members. The UK imports more from EU member states than it exports to them, so they will be substantially harming their own economies if they impose tariffs.
Free trade still are likely as much as a student with a third degree and a bad attitude is still likely to get a job, just a really rubbish one. The countries you listed up there, none of them has the same attitude that Britain does, which is contribute the least and expect the greatest return, while complaining if everyone in the sandbox is agreeing to something you don't like. You can go on and say there are mechanisms that allow Britain to join the IFTA, EAC, etc., but it's the same as a job lot. There is nothing to stop you applying, but it doesn't mean you'll get in. Especially when Britain hasn't got anything that's special to offer, since the special touch Britain has is because it's a EU member.
As I just said, we can very easily form individual treaties.
Number 8. The constant bailouts. British taxpayers are forced to bail out other European countries rather than receive goods and services. Although Britain is in a bit of a bad state as it is, British taxes are still being used to give other European governments huge amounts of money. Unemployment is up, and our country appears to be costing, desperately avoiding a double-dip recession. If we could withdraw from the EU, become self-sufficient, and start trade routes with other countries, we could do so, and be so much better. Instead, our taxpayers are being used to pay for other Europeans rather than British nationals. It's depriving British people of work and advantages they ought to have.
Even if not in the EU, Britain would probably take part in bailouts in Europe, though to a lesser extent, particularly when those bailouts involved IMF money. Not being a member of the European Union would not change the fact that the EU is Britain's closest trading partner, and chaos in Europe would have a negative impact. Better to help reduce that chaos.
True, but anyone who knows the British government well will know that Britain will only help out if they can't find an alternative. If they can find an alternative, goodbye, no help for you. 9. Trade. It is a lie that we will not be able to trade if we leave the EU. We have huge trading partners outside the EU. They tell us this so that we're afraid to go at it alone should we get out. We are being robbed hourly.
Huge it may be, but by comparison to the size of these countries, it is tiny when compared to our trade, which states in the EU in 2011, 8.7% of UK exports went to the Brits, compared with 6% to Ireland. Then consider that Ireland has a population of 6 million compared to the combined Brit population of 2.8 billion. Perhaps geography matters after all.
Oh my god. You are a fucking moron. Of course we're not just gonna fucking trade with fucking Ireland and Ireland alone. We intend to trade with many other fucking nations. I'm pretty fucking sure that we can work out a treaty with the EU itself if we leave, provided the EU doesn't pull any of their bullshit when we get sucked back into it. Number 10. No chance of changing from the pound to the euro. There was talks of Britain becoming part of the new monetary change, making us use the euro instead of the British pound.
At the moment, this is not a reason for leaving, as at the moment there is no chance of a change from the pound to the euro. Indeed, we don't even know if the euro will survive.
Oh, so you're admitting the euro isn't sustainable then? Number 11. Jobs being given to British people. If we pull out of the EU, the British public will have a more chance of getting jobs. When the British earn, we will then start spending in our economy. Most EU nationals send their money home to be spent on their economy, so this is definitely not helping the UK. The only question for me, though, is what would happen to the EU people already here? If pensioners living in Spain, etc., are forced to leave and return to the UK, then the pensions that are paid to them by the UK will be spent in the UK, not Spain, and thus redistributed back in the country. It would not be in the EU's interest to return pensioners back to the UK now, would it?
Please explain how this would be the case. We are unlikely to suddenly chuck out everyone currently working here who are from overseas. Many of them do jobs we don't want or don't have the skills for, and finally there is likely to be some tit for tat. If we do kick out new nationals, there are a lot of Britons living and working in Europe, Even worse, a lot of them are pensioners, which would mean an added burden to the economy rather than a productive gain.
It could work if there was some form of legislation that meant that employers would have to train people with no experience. But that's a big problem in this country, Fucking, we have all these jobs that require experience, and yet employers are reluctant to train people, They're reluctant to train people and give people that experience. And I think that will solve the problem hugely. And now that I think about it, that part about the pensions just seemed kind of stupid, and I sort of go back on that.
But if you leave the EU, the transnational companies will leave too.
I refer back to my argument I made about individual treaties. Thank you very much.
But students will have to pay up to £9,000 a year for tuition.
Nothing a little hard work can't overcome.
But the EU is our guarantor. Its sole purpose was to make war not only unthinkable but materially impossible. Having the EU as a guarantor also means they get negotiate treaties and conventions in our behalf.
Britain does not need the EU to defuse any hostilities between itself and another nation. Also, we can negotiate our own treaties and our own conventions. Okay, thanks, bye.
But, TTU among the Eurocrat among.
It's okay. It's okay. We know you're an idiot. Just go back to your little hole and contemplate what a pathetic waste of a human being you are.
I'm not fucking leaving here until you accept the European Union as your Lord and Savior, and I also demand that you set the great big Eurocrat.
That took care of him. So yeah, in short, the EU is a wasteful, useless organization that's only for reckless spenders and the lazy, bone-idle governments who only want to spend all of the country's GDP. Fuck the European Union. And that's all from me. Tune in on Monday for my rant on Islamic hypocrisy. Until then, bye for now.